I mean,
use
either way.
either. This would be for
Are
the
you
guy.
speaking tonight?
Not that much.
Oh, okay. That's fine. So whoever the speaker is,
He'll
make
get
sure
that
that
one.
works.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
good. I'll turn
Okay.
this one.
Okay. You'll see me. Okay. These are really good. Oh no, that's not the one. The gluten one. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. That's our favorite.
I haven't tried this way, but I mean, I've made gluten.
Oh yeah.
Washed it. I mean, we were in Hawaii, right? They taught me how to do that. and teriyaki it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they make the best gluten. But I'll try this way.
I'll try that because we love it.
I'll get more seats.
Oh, okay. We just
Oh, okay.
Hey, good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited. This is an opportunity to be learning some healthy cooking tips and tasty food. And this also happens to be our last one. I'm sad about that, but I'm also happy because we got everybody here, and I think we made a big impact on everybody's health, and hopefully more longevity and less pain and other kinds of issues that come with medical issues. So we're just so excited to be here, and we have a great program here tonight. And we have Betty, and she's going to be making a cooking demonstration. You probably got some information about gluten, and that's one of my favorite foods that's healthy and tasty. And she's got, if you see all the spices that she's got here, it's amazing. And we also have a great speaker here tonight. His name is Dr. Juno Chow. He's at the Northwest Cancer Clinic here on Deschutes. And he's well qualified to speak on on cancer. He treats cancer, and he's going to talk about how to prevent cancer and tips on how to make you more healthy. Before I start, we start, I like to say a prayer, and so I'm going to start. We'll bow our heads at this time. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to be here tonight, an opportunity to get together and fellowship with our friends from the church and family, and the opportunity to learn more about how to be healthy and how to treat cancer and how to prevent it. An opportunity to taste food that's very healthy and tasty. We thank you for all the things you do for us. In the name of Jesus, amen. Okay, at this point in time, I'm going to have Betty come up. And she's got a microphone, so I think everything's working.
I don't know if
Okay.
it's working, but...
Yeah, we'll be turning it on for you.
Okay, very good. Well, they said it was.
Oh, okay.
So this is not my forte, so I wouldn't even know what button to push. I'm so glad to be here. This is my there it is. This is my very first time I've gotten here, and so I've missed all the amazing things you guys have been learning. And so I went back and I looked at a lot of the YouTubes over the summer, and you've been doing some amazing things and having lots of good discussions on health, and I've missed it all, but so be it. I'm glad to be here tonight, and since it's summer and I just retired, I'm now feeling like I can do other things. So anyway, I hope I'm among friends. I know most of you, but not all of you, so just know my name is Betty, and I've been here in the Tri-Cities a long time. So, and I love to cook, and I love to share what I've been learning. So you have been learning a lot of things that I have missed. So please yell at me if I'm saying something that goes against what you have learned, because we learn together, don't we? So I understand that you have the recipes already in front of you. I don't know how many of you, when you see the word gluten, think of it as a kind of a, oh, gluten, that kind of reaction. Anybody feel that way? Okay, you may be allergic to it then. She's not going to tell us that. But anyway, if you are allergic to it or sensitive to gluten, of course you have to stay away from it. But there's a lot of people, a lot of talk now against gluten. And I guess it is a wonderful protein, and it is something that doesn't have to be processed. And so there's a lot of good things about it. So we're going to start out with gluten. And I use the Vital Wheat gluten. And I put a bag out here. Oops, see, there goes my thing. Out here. Most of you have used it. In fact, how many have used that before? Okay, not too many then. Okay. So it's at the health food store. I'm not promoting health food store necessarily, but they have some good stuff. And I use this all the time. I grew up in a home where my mother made gluten from scratch. She would take the flour and she would soak it, and then she would wash out all the carbohydrates, and what was left with this glob of gluten. So I remember that as a kid. And I thought that's the way you had to do it. And I thought, I'm never going to make gluten, I don't think, because it's so much work. But later on, we found out about this. And so then I started doing a little research on it, and I found out that it's not processed in the way that a lot of flours are. It's basically done just like my mom used to do it: wash it out, take the carbohydrates out, and then the gluten is left, the protein is left there. And then what they do is they dry the gluten part, and then they grind it up very fine, and that's what you end up with, is this flour. So I thought, oh, well, that's good. They didn't put a lot of chemicals. They didn't do anything. So I started feeling better, and I went, oh, let's show you how to do this. Anyway, this is the gluten flour, the Vital Wheat flour, and we're going to put all the dry ingredients together first. And that way, when you mix it with your hands, and I hope that's okay with everyone, it's going to be well cooked. When you mix it, then and put water on it, it's already easy to handle, okay? So I'm just going to go through it really quickly, and you have this to follow along. I'm starting with the gluten, not the gluten gravy right now. And we're going to add back a few things to make it so it's not just a kind of like rubber, because that's what can happen. So we're adding some things back for nutrition, but also so it's not like rubber, okay? So wheat germ is what I'm putting in first, and then the brewer's yeast. And then just a few years ago, I discovered the garbanzo flour. It makes it a nice texture, and so I started using garbanzo flour, and it also has good fiber. So that's a kind of a cool addition. And then, of course, flaxseed, the omega-3s that we're trying to get as much as we can these days. So that's a recent addition to the gluten. And then there is one thing left off of yours, but I think it's written in at the top now. Is that correct? It's the mock chicken seasoning. And I learned just this week about that from you guys. I had no idea. So I was pretty excited to find out that, number one, I shouldn't be probably using the McKay's because it does have oil in it. And if you want to stay away from all oil, then you don't need to use that. But there was a recipe. I don't know whose recipe was that? Somebody that's here, the mock. No? Okay. Anyway, thank you to whoever came up with that, and they brought it to me to my house so I could use it, and so I could check out the recipe using it. So anybody using the mock chicken seasoning yet? Okay, and it works. Pardon? It's not McKay's, but it's mine. Right. That's whoever developed that recipe. I'm very thankful for that. All right, so we're going to put that in, and then we have 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and then I put the onion and garlic powder together, and so that's why there's just one little thing of it. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and mix this with my hands, and I'm sure I should have gloves and all kinds of things like that. But anyway, mix it first, because if you pour that water in there, right, what's going to happen to the vital gluten flour? It's going to just gel together, and you're going to have a separation even between the, anyway, so here we go. And then I use warm water, and you have to work a little bit fast if you have not done this before, because it does gel right away. If any of you are interested in checking out this, you're welcome to come check it out in a minute or two as soon as we get it mixed. Okay, so here we go. And I like to go around the edges because it'll stick right to the edges. So anybody like to do this? I've taught kindergarten and first grade and second grade for many years, and this is what we do. We have lots of fun making all kinds of fun things, whether they're edible or not edible. Just making messes is always a joy. So here we go. Now, that's pretty much done, but I'm going to let it set for 15 minutes. I'm not going to do that tonight for you guys, but I would let it set for 15 minutes, and so that you get the gluten developed a little bit more. And then once you've done that, you're ready. You let it set 15 minutes, and then I do a broth. I'm not going to show that to you tonight, but I use a kettle about this size. If you're doing this, I think it's a 4-quart anyway, and it works really well. And then, let me think, then after the 15 minutes is done and the broth is boiling, then you're going to take this in kind of a log form, and you're going to cut it into 4 pieces. That's what I do because it seems to be easier than to put I used to put all the little pieces in there, and they'd all come out in strange little contortions. They were, some were little, some were big, whatever. This way you kind of get them all the same. So when it comes out, it looks something like this. It's just one of the pieces. And again, it would be cool for you to feel the difference between that and this. This is very firm, and it's ready to slice. And so then I just take it and slice it, and that's what you're going to try tonight, is ones that are sliced. And then I'm going to be putting that in a gluten gravy. So I just had one more little show here. So this is the broth that we're not showing, and this is the gluten that comes out of that, comes out afterwards. Okay, so just a couple things about the broth. It uses Bragg's aminos. You guys are all familiar with that. It's just a soy sauce substitute that's not maybe quite as salty, but it's still pretty salty. And then in the broth, I just use plain old tomato juice because it adds a flavor that I really like. I had a friend that lived here before, and she told me about that. I thought, oh, that's so cool. Let me try it, and it really does. I really do like it. The other thing, when you get to the taco seasoning in the broth, this is what I use, but you can get them in all different forms, but this one is the one from Costco, and so it's maybe cheaper. Yes? All four. It's amazing. You fill that up with 14 cups of water, and you're going to see it clear to almost to the top, but you can fit those 4 pieces in, and then you're going to simmer it. So it's boiling when you put it in. Of course, it stops boiling, and then you just simmer it for an hour. Okay? All right, good question. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to, while that is waiting 15 minutes, we're just going to come over here real quick. I don't know if I guess I need to take my trail with me. All right, and we're going to do a gluten gravy. This is a recipe that I'm so excited about because I just found it just a few months ago, and it's so good. I can serve it to people that are, not worried about their diet at all and like everything to be just perfect with the oils and the, whatever. And I can serve it to people like myself. And everyone seems to like it. So I hope you like it tonight after I give it that blurb. But anyway, the other thing that I love about this recipe is it has beans in it. And that makes it really creamy. And it also adds a ton of fiber to it. And so I'm using white beans, and that's what I always use. And I just, in the Instant Pot, I do 3 cups of white beans and then just freeze them. And I have little containers, and I just have them all stacked up in there, and it's perfect. So you always have some. Today I had to take 2 of them out, one for samples and one for here. And now I have only 1 left, so I have to do that again. Anyway, but it's really, really good. Okay, so we're going to start. This is something kind of weird, and I guess I didn't get my spoon out here, dear whoever is. Yeah, I had a red spoon in there. Anyway, we cook the onions, chop them, but not chopped fine because you're just cooking them. And then you're going to put them in the blender and blend them all up, and it gets the flavors all mixed in nicely. And so we'll wait till they get here with that. And then 1 onion and then garlic. That's what's giving it its flavor. There's 5 cloves of garlic, and you don't have to cook them ahead at all, and they're just fine. And then, thank you so much. So the nuts are your oils. So it's going to have 3 different kinds of nuts in it, but there's not a ton of nuts. This makes a big recipe. You can see 16 servings is what I put it at, but it lasts me a full week usually when I make it. Anyway, so almonds, and they don't have to be slivered almonds. It's just that I sliver all my almonds, so they're ready to use. Cashews, 1/2 cup of each. And then these are the really creamy things too. The pine nuts, you probably use it in pesto and whatever, but they're very creamy, and so it's just 2 tablespoons for that, okay? And we're gonna put that with our already cooked, I don't know if you can see it, but it's big chopped pieces, and it's cooked. I'm gonna add the water in there with it. And my spoon was rubber, and so it didn't make this noise, but that's okay. We can handle it, right? Just hopefully nerves don't get grated on. Okay, very good. And then after that, we are going to add 1.5 cups of water more than that, And then we're going to add the navy beans and 1.25 cups. How many have a Vitamix at your house that you use all the time like I do? Okay. If you don't have a Vitamix, there are probably some other blenders that would do well now, but back in the old days there weren't. What's a good one? The fair is coming up and Vitamix is there? Oh, okay. And they come to Costco once in a while too, right? So, yeah. All right. And then we have nutritional yeast and that great mock chicken seasoning again, and a little bit of whole wheat flour, and a little bit of salt. And what did I miss? Who was watching? Lemon juice, right, okay. So, I don't know if you have one of these, but they're so easy and nice to use, and it has a little measurement on it so you can know what your 1 tablespoon and 2 tablespoons are. So if you have one, just go, yay! No, nobody has one. I should have gotten one for everybody. My sister got me one, and I've seen them at several other people's houses. I have gluten on me here. Okay, all right. So here we go. And we're just going to do that real quick and add the lemon. What do you think the lemon in the gravy would be for? Any ideas? Flavor? Uh-huh, definitely, definitely. Any idea? No, the broth we didn't demo. We are over at the gravy right now. You didn't have what on the recipe? Gluten gravy. Okay, all right. So we got that one figured out. Any other questions while we're doing lemons? What's that? Why do I think lemon juice is in it? Well, I read about it. so I know, but otherwise I might not know. I would have thought it was just flavor too. And it is flavor, but you can lower the salt when you put lemon in. And I didn't realize that. So anyway, okay, and I think you're ready for the next part, huh? I have a hard time. I get to chatting and forget I need to be done. So all I need to do is whiz this up and then we're done. Okay. So now the noisy part. When my husband works from home, I have to wait around until he's done and then I can make my noise. So here it goes. Okay, I know you can't see this well, but it is very, very creamy, and hopefully you'll get to taste it and enjoy it. And then there'll be some gluten cubes in there with it, so it's a gluten gravy, and you can use the gravy without gluten if you want. And we're going to serve it on potatoes tonight. But I love it too with broccoli. You can, put it over broccoli. It's just a nice gravy for. All right, I think that's it. And now, if you have any questions, I guess this is the time, right? Yes. Yeah. So I got busy here at the end because I knew I was going over. But anyway, yes, after you do that whiz, so you get it nice and creamy, then you're just going to put 2 more cups of water in the same thing, and then it will be perfect. And if you want to use broth, like if you had, I showed you the broth in here, if you wanted to use part broth and part, if you wanted a little bit more seasoned, I guess is what, and yes.
Instead of using lemon, you could use real lemon.
I'm sure you can. It's just more acidic, I think, than when, yeah. So you might have to adjust it a little bit. Maybe you'd use 1 tablespoon instead of 2. But good question. Any other questions? All right. All right. Any, as you that are starting to eat, any comments that you could share? Something you could use? Is this something you could use at some point? Yes, it's on the recipe. There are 2 more cups. At the very bottom, it says 2 cups water plus broth. Yes, and whiz it up together. So, all right. All right. Well, thank you for letting me share my little. Do we need to clean this off? Is that what we do next?
Can you tell me how many calories
I have it on my recipe, yes. Which one are you wanting to know, the gluten or the gravy? Both together? Well, it depends on, I guess. For the gluten gravy, which has both, it's 158 calories per serving. And 6 of those of the grams are fat. Yes.
Other than tastes very good, but almost tastes like meat.
Okay, all right. I didn't know because I'm not a meat eater, but so the gluten is what the texture is good, is what you're telling me. Okay, very good. Well, that's what the garbanzo flour does that helps. The garbanzo flour makes the texture more meat-like, evidently. All right. What's that? I serve it hot. How are you getting it tonight?
Mine's cool, yes.
Oh, okay. I serve it hot, just like gravy. And like I said, you can put it on. In fact, tomorrow night we're celebrating my son's 33rd birthday. And so I was making gluten gravy and we put it on waffles too. So it's diverse. You can use it for all kinds of things, and it works. Okay, all right. So if there's no more questions, I'll clean up my mess.
What type of wheat do you use?
What kind of wheat?
Yeah, flour.
This one. It's the vital wheat gluten.
Can it be whole wheat, or does it have to be white wheat?
This is just the protein.
Just the protein.
Protein from the flour. And so yes, we talked about that a little bit on how it's made, and it is not processed in the same way that flour is. Yeah, so it's pretty much just dried the protein and then ground up. At least that's what I read. All right.
Any other questions? Here. Well, I'm going to say, I've tasted this before. It is fantastic. And we want to thank Betty for doing this demonstration for us and be able to get it together. So, we'll have to what we're going to do is right now, we're going to move over and bring all the chairs around the screen up front here. Because there's a lot of people here. And so, stand up here. Yeah, here, let's go ahead and have this one. I can see it's red. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Good. Everybody else was looking for help. Hi, how are you? Now I got a hold of this thing.
Yeah, that's perfect.
But that will take it too.
Okay, okay. Sounds good.
Testing. Okay. Hey, that was a fantastic demonstration, and the gluten is delicious. No question about it. We're going to head on to the second part of the program, but before I do that, because this is really our last time, I want to recognize what I call the EPs. EPs. It's a military term, and it's essential personnel. People that we had to have in order to make sure this thing works. And so I'm not going to call people up, by importance, but I'm just going to pull up people. So I got in the back, Doug and Sharon. Yeah, he's waving. Yeah, thanks for doing that. I see Wanda and Scott back there. So they organized all these cooking demonstrations. I see Betty. She's volunteered to help us out, and that was a very delicious dish. And I have Bert has helped us out, so she's coming up. I want to recognize her. And I think there's more people hiding in the back, but one person I want to make sure I recognize is my wife. You cannot forget her. That's Becky. And Becky, can you round up the other people so they'll come up front so I don't have to? They won't come out. Okay. There are other people that really made a big difference, and I know Robin was part of this program. So the next part is I have a slide up here, and it's in the morning, and finally we got more people to come. We had Brian and Jessica join us. We had Sharon, Doug join us, and now I've got Ryan or Narcilla, and it's in the morning. It's a beautiful photograph. So we're going to show you another photograph. This is on Badger, and this is Bert and Ryan and Narcilla up on Badger, and I can't stress the importance of having exercise, and that's why we do this. I'm going to slow one more slide. This is Dr. Juno Chow. He's at the Northwest Cancer Clinic on Deschutes in Kennewick. Once you meet him, you would want to have him organize your program. He has qualifications, has electrical engineering and computer science degree from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a double degree, medical degree, and a PhD in molecular biotechnology at University of Washington. And he did his residency, and he's board certified, and he's got a fellowship trained. And so we're very, very proud and very happy to have him here. But you know what's even more important than all these academic qualifications is he's a good person. He actually will take care of you. I know that. And he's taken care of other patients in the past that are friends and also patients of ours. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chow, and he's going to talk, and I'm going to remind him he's got about an hour and about almost 2 hours, an hour, and he's got 15 minutes of questions and answers. So at this point, I'm going to turn him over to him, and his topic is on how to prevent cancer, tips on how to prevent cancer and how to go about treating it and how to approach it. All right,
Yep.
Dr. Chow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me here, and thank you so much to Gordon and Becky for the kind invite, and it's so nice to meet all of you guys. Thank you for coming. My name is Juno Cho. I'm the radiation oncologist at Northwest Cancer Clinic. A little bit about myself. I previously worked across the street at Tri-Cities Cancer Center until about 2019, and then I helped open a radiation clinic down in Pendleton, Oregon, where I've been for the past 4 years. But I had the opportunity to come back, and I started up at Northwest Cancer Clinic. It was about 3 months ago, so I'm still kind of new. I'm kind of old, but I'm also kind of new. So it's good to be back in the community. So most of what I do as a radiation oncologist is I treat cancers. I work up cancers. I help diagnose cancers. And so patients will sometimes come to me with different imaging studies, like for instance, they'll come to me with a CT scan showing like a little tiny nodule. We don't know that they have cancer, but I help work them up, help either confirm whether it's cancer, or sometimes these things are benign as well. Sometimes I arrange biopsies, I'll refer to other specialists. And ultimately, if they require it, I will treat them with radiation therapy. This is a picture of an unfortunate patient who this is a brain MRI showing 3 separate tumors here. Sometimes cancers, unfortunately, can spread to the brain, and usually treated with some combination of surgery or radiation therapy. In terms of what I do, there's several different types of radiation that we use in our clinic. This here in the middle, this is sort of our bread and butter. This laser died, but that's okay. So, yeah, it's hard to see. But yeah, so this here is a large machine. It's called a linear accelerator. It sits inside a giant bunker in our clinic. The walls are over 6 feet thick of concrete because that's what's required to stop the radiation from this. The patient lies here on the table, and this is a giant gantry that can actually rotate around the patient 360 degrees. And so the majority of our treatments are actually on this machine, and we treat all kinds of cancers, lung cancers, head and neck cancers, brain cancers, lymphoma, gynecologic cancers, breast cancers, prostate cancers, you name it, we treat them. We also have this machine here called an HDR machine, or high dose rate machine. And the way that this machine works is that there's a radioactive source that sits inside this machine. And so there are certain cancers where we might put an applicator, like for instance for skin cancer, we might put a little metal ball on their skin. The radioactive source actually sits inside a shielded container. And at the correct time, it'll come out through a little wire, and it'll go out to the applicator, and it'll apply radiation with a radioactive seed right next to the tumor. Once they've received enough dose, that radioactive seed actually goes right back into the machine, into the shielded container. We can also use it to treat breast cancers, cervical cancers, uterine cancers. There are certain cancers where it's very helpful to have a radioactive source right next to the tumor. We also do radioactive seed implants for prostate cancer. We do that in the operating room. It's just another way of treating prostate cancer. At this point, I'm the only one in the Tri-Cities who offers this as an option. We also have in our clinic, we also have a hot lab. And so we're able to give radioactive pharmaceuticals like iodine-131 for thyroid cancer. And we're going to be offering other treatments like Xofigo and Pluvicto for metastatic prostate cancer. I also treat some benign conditions as well. You may know people with Dupuytren's contracture. Sometimes you'll shake somebody's hand and they'll kind of shake their hand like this because their fingers are contracted. You can get cords and nodules on the hands and also on the feet, typically in sort of patients who come from a Northern European ancestry. Plantar fasciitis is incredibly common. I've had plantar fasciitis. Usually it goes away on its own within a couple of months. There are those patients who have a hard time with it where they suffer for years. Radiation therapy can actually help with that. We also treat keloids as well. This is just an overgrowth of scar tissue. And oftentimes we treat it with surgery, cut out the keloid, and then we apply radiation to prevent it from coming back. So these are some of the things that we do here in our clinic. My talk today is going to be about how to prevent cancer. How do cancers form? The majority of cancers form due to problems with the DNA. Okay? Specifically, every one of your cells has about 3 billion base pairs of information, just like in a computer. Think of it like a hard drive. There's all this data. Okay? Every time a cell divides from 1 into 2, one of the daughter cells has to have a copy of the original parent cell, including all of the DNA. So you have 3 billion base pairs of information. Your cells are very efficient at copying that DNA, but even with that efficiency, there's going to be errors that occur in replication. Even after that, there's enzymes that will come in and actually proofread that and try to fix those errors. But even after that, there's still mistakes that get put in there. I tell my patients, like, let's say I gave you the complete works of Shakespeare, and I gave you paper and pencil, and I said, here, why don't you copy this? You would do a good job, I know you would. But if we went through and carefully looked at it, there would be some mistakes. It's just part of nature. Even computers, when they copy one hard drive to another, there can be mistakes. I mean, it's rare. It might be 1 in a billion, but that can happen. The same thing happens with DNA. Most of those mistakes in the copying of DNA don't make any difference. They're in nonsense areas of the DNA, or they're in areas like structural proteins where it might just not matter. But occasionally, those mistakes can occur in specific genes that can sort of set the cell toward a path toward cancer. Okay? A small number of these genetic mutations can also be inherited. Like the classic example is something like retinoblastoma, but that's rare. The majority of cancers start because there was some error in replication during cell division at some point in your body. Okay. And because of that, it's not just a human problem developing cancer. As you know, dogs can get cancer. Here's a tumor on the nose of a dog. And basically, most animals can get cancer. Okay? And I found this slide incredibly interesting. What we see is that starting with very small animals, they tend not to get cancer at as high rate as humans because they just don't have as many cells. Okay? As you get larger and larger animals, the cancer rate tends to go up because we just have more cells. You only need one cell to become cancerous to potentially kill that organism. Okay? But as you get to very large sizes, like elephants and giraffes, their rate of cancer actually goes down, right? And nobody really understood this. Why don't elephants get cancer? It's super interesting. And so they actually looked into this. And there are genes called tumor suppressor genes that are actually expressed in our cells that help prevent cells from becoming cancerous. They regulate cell growth. And what they actually found is that these large mammals actually express a ton of these tumor suppressor genes. Like they're actually expressed at levels much higher than in humans. And so their rate of cancer actually goes down. It's super interesting. So in terms of the mutations that occur in order to create a cancer, the genes there's sort of three types of genes that are affected. One is something called an oncogene. So an oncogene is a gene, when it's expressed at high levels, it sort of causes that cell to grow at a faster rate. Okay? It wants to, instead of dividing once every 3 months, it'll kind of push it to maybe divide every 2 weeks. So these oncogenes kind of are, if they're expressed at high levels, they sort of push the cell toward becoming cancer. We talked about the tumor suppressor genes. They're the opposite. When they're expressed at high levels, it kind of slows down that cellular replication. Okay? There's also genes I told you about, like the proofreading enzymes that actually go in, and they actually help fix errors during that copying process. So mutations in any of these can sort of push a cell toward becoming cancerous. For instance, if the oncogenes are expressed at higher levels because of a mutation, that can sort of help create a cancer. If the tumor suppressor genes or the DNA repair genes don't work quite as well, that can sort of put you toward a path. But it's not just one mutation, it's many mutations. You have one mutation, that cell starts dividing a little bit faster. During that process, it accumulates more mutations, and then it starts growing a little bit faster. Next thing you know, you have a tumor. Okay? As this tumor grows, oftentimes it'll develop more and more mutations. So cancer is a disease of genetic mutation. And ultimately, there are special mutations that it can accumulate that can cause it to eventually be able to go into lymph nodes and spread through the lymphatics. Sometimes, for instance, I see head and neck cancer patients. Let's say they started with a tonsil cancer, and they'll present with a nodule on their neck, and that's a lymph node because the cancer jumped into that lymph node. It can also spread through the bloodstream. Eventually, it can go to other organs. The lungs are very commonplace, as well as the liver, bone, can go to the brain. And that's typically when patients get in a lot of trouble, and that's oftentimes how patients die, unfortunately, is when cancer spreads to distant organs. So that's sort of the process of how these cancers start. And it's important to kind of understand that in terms of how can we prevent this. One of the key points I want to make, though, is that not all cancers are preventable. Dogs get cancer. Most animals get cancer, and it's literally part of our biology. Okay. So if we want to prevent cancer, people have looked at this. It's a tough question. It's a tough problem because we can't do experiments on people. Like we can't take 100 people, lock them up in a room and say, okay, we're only going to feed you this for the next 30 years, and then we're going to compare you against another group of 100 people that we're going to lock up in over here and feed you something else, and we're going to compare the cancer rate between you guys. Like that would be the only way to prove that something causes cancer or protects you from cancer. But that's not us. We're out in the world. We're eating what we like. We're, some of us have different habits. Some people smoke. Some people drink. Some people, have a lot of unhealthy habits. Some people eat healthy. But, you're out in the world, and our environment is extremely complex. So it's very difficult to prove that something either causes cancer or prevents cancer. And so most of the studies, most of what I'm going to talk about today is sort of observational. What that means is that we see correlations. We see that the people who tend to have this type of behavior tend to not get cancer, and the patients who have this kind of behavior tend to develop cancers at a higher rate. So a lot of this is observational. It's very difficult to prove a lot of this, but I'll tell you sort of what the state of the art is in terms of our understanding. Okay. So we think that about 40% or so of cancers may be preventable. Again, there's no way to completely avoid it. Cancer is part of our biology, unfortunately. One of the biggest things that we can do, I know that in this population here, within your church, you guys are much healthier than the average population. I'm going to go through a lot of sort of different type of preventive strategies that may not be completely applicable to you and your lifestyle. But we all have friends, we have neighbors, we have grandchildren, we have children, who may not be quite as healthy as you guys. In any case, this is sort of meant to be sort of general knowledge. If I was going to talk to somebody and say, this is my advice for how to try to avoid cancer for as long as possible. The first point I want to make is smoking is really bad. It's been, you guys all know this, it's been on the side of the Surgeon General warning, on the side of every pack of cigarettes for decades. Everybody knows it, but it's also an addictive substance. Most people who smoke know that it's bad for them, but they can't stop because it's an addiction. Okay. There's a lot of effects on the body other than causing cancer. It can create changes in the brain, including depression. It can ruin the lungs. You can get, COPD, emphysema. It can increase your rate of heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, even fertility problems, delayed wound healing. A lot of times, if you need to go in for an elective surgery, some surgeons try not to operate on you if you're a smoker because you're just not going to heal as well. It has a lot of effects throughout the body. Today we're going to focus though on what it does in terms of creating cancer. The other point the other stat that I saw recently was that cigarette smoking kills about 500,000 people each year. During COVID, about 1 million Americans died. It's unfortunate, over probably about the last 3 to 4 years. Okay, so each of those years, there were more people dying from the effects of cigarette smoking than COVID. But we don't really talk about that because we're just used to it. But there's a lot of people dying and these are preventable deaths. 16 million people are living with smoking-related illnesses, and we think that it costs us, the United States, in terms of lost productivity, lost years of life, about $300 billion each year, if you want to look perfectly in terms of monetary comparison. The cigarette manufacturers make a profit of about $55 billion a year. So that's their business. So they make $55 billion a year by causing the loss of $300 billion a year. Doesn't quite seem fair. But that's the world that we live in. So how does smoking cause cancer? So it's a complicated process. There's about 5,000 different chemicals within every cigarette. We don't know what all of them do within the body, but there's certainly compounds that seem to affect the DNA and increase the rate of mutation. It also impairs our ability for our cells to repair that DNA damage. Remember, I told you that's one of the mechanisms by which cancer can be created. And so ultimately, years of smoking, all those chemicals all throughout your body can increase your risk of many different types of cancers. 1 in 8 cancer cases are caused by smoking, and 1 in 5 cancer deaths are caused by smoking. And so the fact that this is a higher risk than this means that the type of cancers that smoking causes it has a higher lethality rate, has a higher fatality rate than the average cancer. We all know that smoking can cause lung cancer, but those same compounds go all throughout our body. Certainly head and neck cancers, we see larynx cancers, tonsil cancers associated with smoking all the time. Bladder cancers are also very common. We don't think of it quite as much, but it can also increase the rate of cervical cancers, pancreatic cancers, colon cancers, liver cancers, because these compounds go all throughout our body. The good news is that if you're able to quit smoking, your risk of cancer every year that you don't smoke actually decreases. And what we tell patients is that usually it bottoms out by about 20 years of not smoking. Your rate has decreased to almost the same as if you never smoked. So it's never too late. There's also some good stats, like if somebody's a smoker and they quit when they're 30, their decrease in the number of expected years of life is actually fairly minimal. The later that you quit, you can still recover years of life, but it's not quite as good as if you quit in your 30s. Also, your risk of heart attacks and strokes goes down, usually within about 10 to 15 years. Your rate of cancer goes down, and the immediate effects, usually even within a year, you notice improvements in your breathing. So it's never too late. There's many different ways of quitting. The vast majority of patients just decrease the amount of smoking that they do. So if I have a patient who smokes 1 pack of cigarettes a day, I might tell them, look, every month, why don't you decrease that by 2 cigarettes a day? And usually within about 10 months, you can get down to almost 0, throw them away. That's what most people do. Some people quit cold turkey. If that's too hard for patients, sometimes some patients have luck with nicotine patches. There's also oral medications like Chantix that can actually decrease their sort of drive to smoke, their cravings, those sorts of things. Biggest side effect of Chantix, unfortunately, is nightmares. So some patients don't like that. Okay, but any which way, any of my patients who walk into my clinic who are still smokers, I talk to them about smoking. But and I talk to them about it every time, maybe every 3 months over several years. And believe it or not, many of them actually successfully quit. It kind of means a lot when their doctor tells them you have to quit. So they all know this, but having somebody tell them seems to make a difference. I know that the topic today with the cooking demonstration and everything like that was how to eat a healthy diet. So we think that about 5% of cancers are associated with poor diets. The general advice is, eat more sort of multi-grain, whole grain. Grains seem to be really important. Beans, legumes, lots of fruits and vegetables. These are all good things and associated with a decreased risk of cancer. Things that are associated with an increased risk of cancer are alcohol intake, red and processed meats, sugary foods and drinks, processed foods. And so that's the theme over and over again. The more processed food is in your diet, the worse your health is going to be. There was actually a pretty good study, this Zhang et al. Study, Preventable Cancer Burden Associated with Dietary Intake in the United States. They really did a deep dive into what types of foods, by just looking at a large population, lots of surveys, having patients sort of having the participants actually talk about what their diet actually is, and following them and actually looking at what type of cancers that they got over time. The largest association was with colorectal cancers, but other cancers seemed to be associated with diet as well. Head and neck cancers, uterine cancers, breast cancers, kidney cancer, stomach cancer, liver cancer. But the biggest effect was for colorectal cancers. And in terms of advice, if you were to ask me, what kind of foods should I be eating? So the biggest association they found was with whole grain intake. So by far, just by avoiding sort of heavily processed, kind of white bread like Wonder Bread, and going more with whole grain, that seemed to have the biggest impact. But other things were, dairy seems to be protective. So if you have a low dairy intake, that can increase your risk for cancer. Highly processed meat intake, and this is sort of in order of importance. So vegetable and fruits can be helpful. High red meat intake can increase your risk of cancers. High intake of sugar sweetened beverages, and this is in sort of decreasing order of importance. Okay. There's also some ethnic connections. Hard to say whether there's something inherently in terms of genetics or whether it's just the populations within the United States, but men, middle-aged Americans, some racial ethnic groups, non-Hispanic blacks, Hispanics, others, they seem to have a higher proportion of diet-associated cancers. So I know this population is probably not heavily into drinking alcohol, but alcohol has also been linked to many different cancers. Breast cancers, liver cancers, stomach cancers, esophageal cancers, mouth cancers, pancreatic cancers, colorectal cancers. Some of it is due to sort of direct irritation and constant inflammation, like in the head and neck area. But there's also other mechanisms by which alcohol can cause cancer. For instance, alcohol is broken down by this enzyme into acetaldehyde, and eventually that's broken down into acetate. This enzyme here, ALDH, actually helps break down acetaldehyde. You may have friends who oftentimes are from like an Asian ancestry who sort of get that Asian blush. They drink alcohol and their face turns red. That's oftentimes because there's a decrease in the amount of this enzyme, and so this acetaldehyde builds up, and they can't break it down as well as the general population. This acetaldehyde seems to be a carcinogen. It can create mistakes in the DNA, can cause problems with chromosomal rearrangements, and it can sort of alter the formation of the DNA and cause sort of clumping of the DNA and things like that. There's different mechanisms by which acetaldehyde can cause DNA damage. Independent of your diet, your just being overweight can also increase your risk for cancers. And lots of health effects, but we know that in the United States, there's different theories about why this is, but our rate of obesity just keeps increasing. The rest of the world looks at us and thinks we're crazy. I mean, they really do. This seems to be, it is a problem around the world, but the United States is extremely special in this regard. We have about 41% of the population right now is considered obese. I've seen figures above 50%, and it's just increasing. It just keeps getting worse and worse. There's many different ways in which just being obese can increase your risk of cancer. There's a lot of different growth factors and things like that the fat cells actually can secrete that can sort of promote growth and cell division, and as we talked about, cell division by itself can increase your risk of cancer. One of the mechanisms that have been worked out pretty well is that we know that fat cells produce estrogen. Okay, so the more fat cells that you have, the larger that they are, the more fat content of those cells, the more estrogen that you actually produce. And so that's a mechanism by which we think that it increases your risk of breast cancers and uterine cancers. Those cells actually have receptors, estrogen receptors on them. When they see that estrogen, it actually promotes growth, it promotes cell division. But many other cancers have been associated with just being obese. Again, colon cancer keeps coming up over and over again. Ovarian cancer, probably related to estrogen, but kidney cancers, multiple myelomas, esophageal cancers, there's a pretty large list. As Gordon said earlier, it's really important to stay physically active, independent of weight, independent of diet. Physical activity also seems to be associated with risk of cancer, lung cancer, stomach cancers, uterine cancers, bladder cancers, breast cancers. A lot of these keep coming up over and over again. Again, these are all based on observational studies, so it's kind of hard to say. I mean, like, the people out there who are physically active, they tend to be less likely to be obese. They tend to sort of eat a little bit healthier. So there's a lot of these associations are difficult to tease out, okay? But it does seem to be an independent factor. The recommendation, this is to be active at least 150 minutes a week. So that's, let's say, 30 minutes a day of just walking Monday through Friday. That'll get you there. If you want bonus points, you can actually be more active than that. I think there's a recommendation here for 45 to 90 minutes every day. That's above and beyond. But the minimum that's recommended is this 150 minutes a week. Even just walking in the park, riding your bike, chasing after your grandkids, try to stay physically active. One of the more common, or I should say, the most common cancer is actually skin cancer. Okay, and you can see the number of prostate cancers that, so if each of these represents a certain number of patients with prostate cancer every year, this is breast cancer, this is lung cancer, this is skin cancer, okay? Lots of skin cancer, yeah. I have patients who develop about 4 or 5 skin cancers a year that have to be cut out, okay? A lot of you guys know this, but I'll just review. It's important to protect yourself from the effects of the sun. There's several different wavelengths of UV light. There's a whole spectrum. All of that UV light can actually go in and damage your DNA. Again, it all comes down to DNA cell division. So the advice is wear protective clothing, try to protect yourself from the sun, umbrellas, sunblock, hats, sunglasses to help protect your eyes, and limit your exposure to sun during the sort of harshest times of the day. I think here it's listing it's hard for me to read, but I think it says 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The other thing to realize is that most skin cancers occur as you get older. Okay, the peak seems to be around 50 to 60. After that, the population actually declines. But if you just look at per capita, this would just per person, your risk, it would just keep going up as you get older. And so when you're younger, when you're like 20 and 30, and you're running around with your friends and you're on the beach and you don't wear any sunblock and you get burnt, you don't think much of it. You get a sunburn, maybe a week later you're fine and you don't even remember it, right? Well, your skin actually remembers, okay? And the more times that you've been burnt, the more likely you are to get skin cancers, okay? But you don't get it right away. You get burned a few times in your 30s, your 40s, nothing happens, but your skin remembers, and those areas that got burned will start developing cancers when you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s. And so it's really important for the young people in the audience to actually really protect your skin. It doesn't seem like it makes that much of a difference now, but you'll thank yourself as you get older. So these are a couple of patients of mine. This is a big basal cell carcinoma that was kind of ignored on the neck. Kind of looks like a raspberry. In this particular case, we gave radiation to this, and it sort of shrank down and it disappeared. This is a patient with what we call field cancerization. So he's had so much sun exposure on his scalp that this scalp actually produces about 4 skin cancers every year, okay? And in this current process, he actually has had 3 melanomas that are currently being cut on, that we're trying to clear the margins. And then there was a big squamous cell carcinoma that was removed from here, but they couldn't clear the margin, so we're giving radiation to that one. Even if we take care of these, this is heavily sun-damaged skin, and unfortunately, he's going to continue to develop skin cancers in this location for the rest of his life. So, like I said, wear hats, sunblock. You can't undo this, but you can prevent that. Another way to protect yourself is to get vaccinated. There's actually many viruses that are associated with cancer. And it sort of makes sense, right? I mean, the way that viruses work is they inject foreign DNA into your cells and actually make your cells produce more of that virus. But those proteins can also affect other areas of cellular function. Hepatitis B, it's not as much of an issue in this country, but it is a huge issue worldwide. Huge burdens of liver cancer caused by hepatitis B. The good news is that there is a vaccine for it. More than 50% of liver cancers are caused by this virus. It can become a chronic infection over time. It can slowly damage the liver, and you can get basically liver failure. You can get what we call a cirrhotic or burnt out liver. And that chronic inflammation by itself can help create a cancer. The hepatitis B virus can also has direct effects on the DNA as well, and it can also help promote a cancer by that mechanism as well. Another virus that we often talk about that's in the media is HPV, or human papillomavirus. It's now recommended for children as young as 9 years old to get vaccinated, and it's certainly recommended anyone between the ages of 9 and 26. Human papillomavirus it's a sexually transmitted virus, but it's incredibly common. I know that there's been some culture wars surrounding this because it is a sexually transmitted disease essentially, but it's incredibly common. We think that about 80% of the population by the time they're 50 has been exposed to HPV at some point. And about 30% of people actually are thought to carry it on a chronic basis. And those are the patients where that virus over time can help create a cancer. Cervical cancer is the most sort of common one that we think about, but what's being more recognized every year is that it can also sit in the back of your throat, and it can actually create an oropharyngeal cancer, like a base of tongue cancer or a tonsil cancer. And this virus, it doesn't have any symptoms. Like, you could carry it in the back of your throat for 40 years and you don't know. But over that time, it's sort of slowly creating a cancer. And so by the time you're 60, you get a oropharyngeal cancer, and it was because you were infected when you were 20. But we have effective vaccines that can actually prevent you from being infected. And that's the amazing part of this story. And so really, we're trying to vaccinate children before they become sexually active, which makes sense. Between the ages of 27 and 45, the recommendation is there be shared clinical decision making, meaning you talk to your doctor. It is an option for those populations as well. The only thing is that usually by that age, most people have been sexually active, have probably been exposed to some extent, but there are over 35 different variants of HPV. Most of the vaccines right now protect against anywhere from about 4 to 9 of those serotypes, and so there may still be a benefit. And so they're saying, have a conversation with your doctor. Over the age of 45, not really recommended. If you're going to be exposed, you've been exposed. The other thing too is once you've been exposed, it takes 30, 40 years for it to create a cancer. So maybe at that point, it doesn't make so much sense. So if you're above the age of 45, don't worry about it. Of course, this is not meant for this congregation or this population at all, but in general, the population out there. Avoid risky behaviors. So other viruses that we don't have vaccines for, like HIV and hepatitis C, can also create cancers. HIV can increase the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Kaposi sarcoma, which it's pretty rare outside of HIV populations, but it can also increase the risk of lung cancers, anal cancers. I do treat a fair amount of anal cancer, and one of the requirements, according to the guidelines, is as soon as you see a case, we always test for HIV, just to make sure. And you have to treat the HIV to effectively treat the anal cancer if they're infected. Hepatitis C, similar to hepatitis B, can also sort of create liver damage and failure over time. And it's very common for patients to be infected with hepatitis C and not know. Typically, it's through sharing of blood products, shared needles. It can also be sexually transmitted. And over time, about 1 to 4% of patients with a chronic hepatitis C infection will get liver cancer. So the good news is that we now have cures for hepatitis C. There's actually a drug regimen, but you have to know that you have it. And most people don't actually. But we're sort of recognizing more and more the sort of at-risk populations. There's tests to see if you're infected, and more patients are actually being cured of hepatitis C. So there is some good news. So I'm going to talk briefly about cancer screening. So cancer screening by itself doesn't prevent a cancer, but it does allow us to find the cancers when they're very early or when they're sort of in a precancerous state where it's much more treatable and much more curable. That's the goal. So at younger ages, and this applies to women, cervical cancer screening, that's the pap smears, that's the pelvic exams. But until you're 40, that's pretty much the only cancer screening that's sort of recommended for the general population. Once you turn 40, there's more recommendations. And again, as you can see, as we get older, our risk of cancer just increases every year that we're alive. And so there's more screening that occurs. So starting at the age of 40, breast cancer screening, these are mammograms. Continue the cervical cancer screening. Colorectal screening, the recommendations used to be at the age of 50, and now it's down to 45. So anyone over the age of 45 should get a colonoscopy. Okay? If that's relatively clear, they'll just recommend another one in 10 years. So it's a once a decade kind of thing. Prostate cancer screening is actually pretty easy. Usually it's just a blood test. We just check for a protein called PSA or prostate-specific antigen. So relatively painless there. Sometimes also a rectal exam. Above the age of 50, the only thing that they add is lung cancer screening. This is really just for those high-risk populations. So the U.S. Preventive Task Force recommends that anyone between the ages of 50 and 80 who have at least a 30-pack-year smoking history, what that means is the equivalent of a pack a day for 30 years or more, is considered at a high risk. Who's either still smoking or quit within the last 15 years is eligible for lung cancer screening. And all that consists of is a low-dose CT scan that you get once a year, and it can actually show little nodules that we wouldn't see with a chest X-ray. There were previous studies where they did annual chest X-rays on patients, and they didn't show that actually helped patients to actually survive their lung cancers any better than the normal population. They did change that to a CT scan, which is basically a three-dimensional chest X-ray, and they actually saw almost a 7% reduction in mortality from all causes, 20% reduction in lung cancer mortality for these high-risk populations that were getting annual screening CT scans. So there's a large number so you saw the numbers of patients who actually smoke, and who have smoked. And so there's a large number of people out there in the community, out there in the United States, who are actually eligible for lung cancer screening. Unfortunately, it hasn't really caught on yet. Some of this is, maybe some of the primary care providers aren't sending patients as often as they should. Maybe there's some reluctance from some patients. It's hard to say, but right now only about 6% of eligible patients are actually getting screened, but it can save lives. So if you know someone who has a pretty strong smoking history, urge them to go for a lung cancer screening CT scan. You might save their life. Thank you, guys. Yeah. Okay. I'm happy to answer questions, yeah. So it does. So there is some data actually that it can increase the risk of lung cancer, but it's not as strong as for primary smoking. So, but